Welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. My name is Audrey Monkey, and I am your host. Here on the podcast and on my website, I write, research, speak, and interview podcast guests on the topics of parenting, summer camp, and happiness. I share ideas, stories, and tips to help parents and anyone else who works with young people raise competent, kind, optimistic kids. In episode 26, I'm chatting with Naomi Riley about her recently published book, Be the Parent Please, Stop Banning Seesaws and Start Banning Snapchat, Strategies for Solving the Real Parenting Problems. Enjoy the podcast. So why don't we just get started by you telling us just who you are and what motivated you to write this book, or how you came to write Be the Parent?
Sure. So I am a journalist by training. I've written books on a number of different subjects, education, religion, and I've written for different newspapers and magazines. I used to work at the Wall Street Journal. And I'm also a mother. I have an 11-year-old, 9-year-old, and 5-year-old now. And so I think I really wrote this book because I was on the beginning of this journey, as I think pretty much all modern parents are these days, wondering how to and whether to fit screen time into my children's lives. And I really wanted to get a sense of what the actual research said about the effects of screen time. And I wanted to try to figure out what were some reasonable limits to put in place, talking to parents of older children and thinking about what the expectations were going to be down the line and trying to kind of set them early in that way. And also just talking to parents about, how they coped, once you made these decisions, how did you find people who, were allies, in the view that you took about screen time. So this book is kind of a compilation. It's personal experience, but it's also a lot of interviewing with, researchers, doctors, and a lot of other parents as well.
It's funny because I don't know if you know my background, but I'm a camp director, and summer camps have been really popular of late. And one of the reasons, I think, is because parents really know that their kids need a break from technology, and most summer camps are tech-free, although there are some who have chosen to go a different direction. But, and I'm finding that that's become something that, summer camps didn't, 100 years ago, that was not what was part of summer camp. But now it's the thought of having your kid just detox and be in nature and be off screens for a couple weeks is huge for parents. And I think part of that comes from, you're kind of lucky, I think, your age of your kids, because the whole tech thing started, I don't know, you can probably tell me better. What was the year that like smartphones and all these social media things started?
So the iPhone was a little bit more than 10 years ago now, and I think that was probably, the explosion. I mean, I think, the iPads too, but the phones, the portability is so much of this issue, because obviously, we've had screens for a long time. Kids used to harass parents about watching television. Yep. And the question is, but you left the house and that was it. We don't have a television in the car, kids. Sorry, we're going to have to drive to Buffalo without it.
Right.
And I think that now, because your phone is always with you, I mean, even the tablet, you kind of have to make a decision, are you going to take it with you or not? But you're never without your phone, and your kids know you're never without your phone. And so there's always that temptation, unless you kind of set those expectations that we're not going to do this. We're not every time we wait in line at the supermarket, not every time we're waiting for food to come at the diner, not every time we're in the car are we going to have a screen to entertain us. So I think that, it's interesting with the camps, because I think you saw originally there was this, parents were sort of trying to, there were these stories in the New York Times about parents trying to sneak phones into camp with kids, that they give the kids two phones, like one to hand over to their counselor and one that they would, put under their bed or something like that. I don't know whether you experienced this as a camp director, but, I think for me that signaled how much of this was not about the kids' desire for technology, but how much of it was was about the parents' desire for a connection with the kid and how reluctant they were to let go in that sense. And I think you still see that a lot in schools now. A lot of schools have finally decided that phones really don't belong in the classroom, and they probably don't belong in the school at all. But parents are like, oh, well, what happens in an emergency? How will my child, send me text messages? I'm like, that either you're leaving your kid with adults that you trust, or you're not. And I think that's a decision you have to make. Like, I don't think that having this connection is, but they're not. I think they're being a little disingenuous because it's not all about safety for them. It's also about wanting that social connection and wanting to feel like their kid always needs them. And I think that camp it's such a great time. I mean, my kids both go to this will be my daughter's third year, my son's second year. Going to a multi-week overnight camp. And what's nice for them is that nobody has this technology, and so I mean they're kind of I think they're used to being kind of they're used to not having phones, but what's nice for them is they're finally around other kids who aren't constantly looking at their phones and tablets, and I think it creates a nice environment for the kids too, because the kids have to learn how to interact socially, and they have to learn how to look at each other, and everybody is paying attention to talking during meals and not looking down at screens, and in their off time too. They're playing cards, they're reading books, or they're playing games with other kids. And this is sort of as close as they're going to get to the childhood that their parents and grandparents had, I think. So I think that there's a lot to that, and it's interesting because I think that these camps that do ban technology, in most cases, are very popular, and it's because I think parents really realize that their kids need that break.
Definitely. Well, it's interesting. You covered so many things that, yes, are near and dear to my heart there. But one thing I just wanted to, I think one of the messages that I am finding as a camp director is that kids respond very well to limits, especially if they're on everybody. So when kids are at camp, they're not missing their devices. In fact, we have teenagers telling us how much they're enjoying not having their devices. And I think the lesson to be learned and what parents can learn is, like you said, we need to kind of rally together a little bit more, because it's really hard as a parent to feel like you're the only one doing certain things, like, when your kids are teenagers, saying, hey, we're going to turn off our phones, at night and plug them in, not in your rooms. And even just something as simple as that, with my younger two, who are now 14 and 17, actually, it has been a completely different journey than with my older kids, who fortunately aged up before the whole smartphone revolution. And so I think there's this group of kids and parents, and of course all these studies that are coming out now. Your book talks about a lot of them, but there's articles, I think every week there's something about, the rise in anxiety and depression corresponds exactly with the smartphones and all these things. So I feel bad for basically this one group, which is, I'm part of it because my younger kids are in it, where we got kind of blindsided by what all this tech. And then the schools, you talked about that in your book too. And I have always said, you know what, my kids get plenty. They learned how to use, even my older kids, they learned how to use a computer. It seems like all kids have access to something almost. They can go to the library or whatever. They don't need them at school.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you said the library, because it became obvious to me very early on when I took my, my kids were little, and we, took them to just go to the children's room at the library, like on a free afternoon or something like that. And they just immediately gravitated toward the computers, and they thought the library was like computer game time. And it's funny, like, sort of how this, it morphed into that. But I think the school situation, I think a lot of parents really do feel bombarded, like their kids are, handed this Chromebook or this, tablet. You have all these states that went to this one-to-one, iPad program or Chromebook program. The tech companies are only too happy to accommodate these schools and put this stuff into the classroom to get the kids hooked on it early. And the schools, it's sort of this, mutually reinforcing system where the schools say to the parents, look at all this shiny new technology technology that we have, and the parents say, oh, this must mean my kids are getting a great education because the school has the latest cutting-edge stuff. And, it's sort of all mutually reinforcing. Unfortunately, there are no studies that suggest that there's much educational benefit to that technology. So at some point, somebody has to stop the cycle and say, hey, guys, let's get off for a second, because I think that this is not doing what you think it's doing. And what it is doing is providing a lot of distractions in the classroom, which is really hard. And I think especially for kids who are on the lower end of the learning spectrum, it's really hard. These kind of distractions make it really difficult for them to learn. But to get back to the question about the parenting difficulties, I think the one thing that I do want to assure parents of is that when I talk to parents around the country for this book, and in every community, I am convinced that there are a number of parents who feel this way and who are trying to restrict technology. And I would just, if you're one of those parents who really wants to, but, is not, is worried about kind of doing it alone, and it is hard. You don't want to parent in a vacuum, I just, trying to find those other parents is so important. And you don't want to micromanage your kids' friendships and be like, oh, you can only be friends with that kid or that kid. But, we parents do this in all sorts of subtle ways. There are kids that we go out of our way, essentially, for our kids to play with. And there are kids that we're like, I'm not really that concerned about whether that play date's going to work out today. And I think that, we can do a lot in order to try to bring our kids together with other kids who are not going to be looking at their phones the whole time, that they're together, and who are interested in playing outside, and who are, not going to look at you like you have three heads when you suggest that they play a board game because it's raining outside. These are, it's not impossible, like I said, to find these parents, but you do have to put in a little effort.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Well, I think, it's funny because I have been following this whole Unplugged and all this stuff a lot. And one of our former counselors, she has now 2 years in a row hosted sleepover parties for her now 13-year-old daughter, where she specifically sent a text to all the parents ahead of time saying that it would be a phone and device-free overnight slumber party. And she created this really cute little basket for the kids to put their phones in. And she let them know that, of course, if they need to reach their parents, they can, talk to her, use their phone, but that they weren't going to be doing Snapchat and Instagram and taking pictures of each other and all this stuff. And it has been, I interviewed her last year for the podcast, and just the kids all had a great time. And kids are really good. Like when you say to them, hey, you know what, let's go get pizza. Hey, everybody leave your phones in the car. The kids will listen. Even your your kids' friends will listen to you because you're the parent. So you can be more assertive, and that's something that of course, since I'm a camp director, it comes naturally to me to tell when my boys have someone sleeping over, I'm like, oh, okay, we charge our phones down here. Go ahead and plug it in. Even though it's I don't have a problem saying that, but I think parents need to step up and just realize that you're the parent, and especially in your house, your car, whatever, you can just say, hey guys, you know what? Let's just take a break for a minute and you guys do some other things. Or, hey, we're going to go into this restaurant and let's leave our phones here so that we don't get distracted or whatever.
Right. And it's, it starts so early. It's funny. So my daughter's now 11, but I would say, she's probably been, doing sleepovers the last couple of years. And I didn't even realize 2 years ago, I found out that that her friend had come over and that her friend had brought a phone with her. Mm-hmm. And the parents did not alert me to the fact that she had a phone with her. I had no idea why she had a phone with her because, again, if she needs to contact her parents, it's not like this is a problem for us. We have landlines, we have email. There are all sorts of ways we can contact our parents in case of an emergency. So why did she bring this phone? And then when I sort of said something to the parents about it, I said, look, that's not really for us. And I haven't given Emily access to a phone yet, and I was surprised that your daughter brought over one. And first they said, well, she can only use it over Wi-Fi, or there are all these, if you start talking to parents about phones, they'll give you all these, oh, it's not a real phone, or oh, it can't do this, that, or the other thing. I'm like, well, look, if it's still being used to, in some way, connect to the internet, and if it's still being used to communicate with other people in a kind of social media or in a setting where people are going to maybe take pictures or do things that are going to be hard to take back, then that's a phone. I mean, you can sort of debate what Apple wants to call it, but this is what I am going to call it, And I think, parents are sort of taken aback because they have found all these justifications in their own head for giving their kids these devices. And again, I just think, you need to be clear, not only when the other kids are there, but I think that what this counselor was doing made a lot of sense because you need to make clear to parents what the expectations are in your house. And I very much try to do that, and I think, you're right. When kids come over, they'll listen to you. But if they have a phone on them and you don't even know about it, I think that, again, there's just a feeling that we're not all on the same page here. Mm-hmm. And we somehow need to communicate our expectations. And sometimes I will communicate with the kids like this. I tell the story in the book, and people laugh, and maybe I was being a little bit mean, but this kid came over to play with my son when the two of them were like 6 or 7, and the boy walked in the house. They had a snack, and not 3 minutes later, he said to me, "Okay, can I have a device?" And I sort of looked at him, and I just said, "You are the device."
Right. Oh my gosh.
The whole point of you being here is that you and my son are going to play and you're going to entertain each other. And why would I hand it to you? But it's so clear that is the expectation in his house. And so you kind of have to, get your hands around kind of what's going on in other people's homes and families, and then create expectations and also create those expectations for your children. And this is one of the things that I just drives me up a wall because I think parents, it's true, we are bombarded by technology, and I don't want to make it sound like this book is just yelling at people because that was not my goal. I think that we're all, as parents, under a lot of pressure. But I also think that we have somehow lost sight of all sense about parenting when it comes to screens. And we have sense when it comes to other things. Like, our kids do not ask us for chocolate cake for breakfast every morning. And you know why? Because you have created the expectation that breakfast involves, cereal and eggs and toast and fruit, and that's it. And with technology, if you create the expectation in your home that we don't have screens on weeknights, or we don't use screens at the table, or we don't use screens at sleepovers, they will not bombard you every day with, why can't I have a screen at this meal, and why can't I have a screen at this sleepover? Because they know what to expect. So sometimes parents I think there's something about screens that makes us throw common sense and parenting, technology and parenting sense out the window.
Well, I think that for you your message is really an important one, and one that's very timely. And I think what's going to happen, I'm sure that parents are now going to be able to, parents with the younger kids now, before they've, they're even seeing it with toddlers and everything, people who are, whipping out the iPad anytime there's, sitting at restaurants. I mean, that used to be, I remember getting the crayons with my older kids and they would sometimes get bored and then we'd have to walk around and, they'd have to kind of keep themselves busy. But now there's just it's so easy when you're tired and just hand your kid the iPad and they'll watch a movie and you can get some peace and eat your meal. So I think there's some times where we need to give parents some grace. There are times that you're just going to choose that, you all need a little break. You need your child occupied and not telling you they're bored. So once in a while, it's fine. It's just a matter of making it not the habit that's always the default thing, I think, for parents. And I really feel for, just this, I think it's a pretty small group, and I'm going to say it's the group where your kids were coming of age when Instagram came to be. So your kids were, young, so for my kids, my older kids, they were in high school or college before these things. And so it was not for them. I see and they also hand wrote their notes in school and still did as college students and had a whole different experience than my two younger ones. And so I've had this impression of, oh my gosh, do you guys all see what these kids are? I tell my own kids when I share another article with them about, the impact of screen time or something, I say, you guys are the guinea pigs. We don't even, these studies are now coming out. So parents that have kids in their teens now, maybe age, 11 and up, I think it's really too bad. But I think you're right. We need to kind of take it back and take a step back. And if we have just made it this thing where the screens are everywhere, there's no limits, just deciding some simple ways you can just, set some limits, and especially around social connection with kids can figure out to do fun things together. They still have that capacity, but they're not as good at it. If they haven't had a chance to practice, they do need a little guidance. Okay, here's a list of some things you can do. You can run outside and go try to build a fort. You can go ride your bikes. You can play a board game, give them some options.
Right, but we also need to, I think set reasonable expectations for in what settings we expect kids to be able to behave in certain ways and entertain themselves.
Yes.
I think it's very easy. A lot of parents, might not think this, but I think, if you have, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, it's very easy for them to entertain themselves at home. They can run around, they can yell, they can, they can play games, they can play with whatever toys they have, they can lose their shoe, they can throw their shoe, whatever it is. But if you're sitting there trying to figure out, how am I going to get my 2-year-old to behave in a nice restaurant while we sit for 2 hours, maybe the answer is, you shouldn't be taking your kid who's to a nice restaurant for 2 hours and expecting that they will be able to behave like a child who is much older or like an adult. I think, if you're using screens to make your kids behave, I think, there are obviously times when that has to happen. And maybe, when you're flying across the country, that has to happen. And, when you're waiting in a doctor's office and you have to make sure that, everybody is reasonably under control, or you're in an emergency room, or there are all these settings I think where you could think of that. Look, I have to be here. There's nothing I could do. I have to have my kid here. I have no place else to put them, and the iPad is going to be the answer to this problem. But I think there are all sorts of choices that we make, and I look around. My oldest daughter is on a swim team, and I look around at some of the swim meets, and swim meets are, if you've ever been to one, they're just the most boring and interminable events. And I look around and I see all of these, 3 and 4-year-olds for 3 hours sitting there during the swim meet, and they're on screens. And the only way you could take your 3-year-old to a swim meet is to put them on a screen. So what's the answer? Well, it probably is that your 3-year-old shouldn't be there for a 3-hour swim meet. Maybe one parent is staying home, or, maybe you're dropping the kid off and maybe you're not watching the whole swim meet. Whatever it is, I just think, screens seem like the answer to problems, but some of these problems are problems that we have created ourselves.
Yep, I agree. I do agree. I often have seen that. Even when my older kids were little, before the thing, some people would bring a 4-year-old to a movie or something that was an adult movie. And my husband and I would always be thinking, why is that kid here? First of all, it's not appropriate content for them, but also how do you, it's like having appropriate expectations based on your kid's age. And like you said, get a babysitter if you want to go to a nice 2-hour dinner and, and have, their kid playing at home and running around and having their mac and cheese, and you can have a nice dinner. So I definitely agree with that. So this has been so helpful, so many good little words of wisdom for us. And I think just encouragement to parents. Like you said, there are like-minded people out there. And so just talking to parents and finding those people and making your expectations clear ahead of time is so good. And something you said in the beginning really struck me, because this has been a thing both with whether it's a camp or a school or a sleepover, is you want to feel like you trust the adults that you're trusting your child with. And so the bottom line is your child shouldn't need a device to get in touch with you. You need to feel like that parent, that camp, that school is going to get in touch with you if anything is needed to be discussed. And and that's the bottom line, that if it's still the same parenting thing that we've always had, is you kind of don't put your kid in situations that you're not feeling comfortable with. If you're not feeling like you trust the camp, the school, the parent that's at the sleepover, then your child shouldn't be there with or without a device.
And also, also trusting your child at a certain age. That too. One of the tips that I offer in the book, parents say, well, how am I going to ever arrange to pick up my child from X, Y, or Z, soccer practice or, party if they don't have a phone? I just say, well, do they have a watch? I'll meet you outside at 5:00.
Right.
So do you think your child is old enough to be able to look at a watch, calculate the time, and meet you outside when they're supposed to? And I think that that at the age we're talking about getting kids phones, they should, at the age of, let's say 9 or 10, there certainly should be an expectation that your child should be able to follow that basic direction. And also that your child should be able to, if something goes wrong, if they can't be when they're supposed to, or they need to be picked up earlier, that they can also say to the adult who's present, excuse me, I need to get in touch with my parent. Can you help me do that?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
That's also a life skill that's important.
Oh, definitely. Being able to ask other adults for help. That's been, I mean, that's an important life skill. Julie Lithcott-Hames talked about that in her book, about how kids are getting to college and don't know how to just like talk to other adults and ask for help because they're so used to just texting or calling their parents. And so having your 9-year-old have the skill to, ask your friend's parent, say, hey, can you let my mom know, what time you want me to get picked up or whatever. That is a great skill that they're going to learn. Well, let's finish off by, can you just tell us where we can find more about you? Do you have a website, or where can people find your articles and learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, so I have my articles are published in a variety of publications, and so it's best to find them on my website, which is naomiriley.com. It's RILEY. I update that regularly. I have, pieces that appear in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other places. And there's also descriptions of the book there and some information about, places that I'll be speaking in the future. And if they want to buy the book, Amazon or Barnes & Noble is the, best place. So I really appreciate you're taking the time to talk to me.
Well, thank you so much for being on. This has been great, and I'm inspired once again to rally with other parents, especially around the issues going on at school, because I think that's another area that parents can get more involved and speak up more and just say to schools, hey, what are we doing with this, and when are our kids learning to write with a pencil, and how does that benefit their brain too, and all that. So this has been great. Thank you so much, Naomi, for being on, and I hope you can continue to spread the word about the importance of just being reasonable about these our kids and their screen use. So thanks again for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. For notes, links, and more information about our conversation, visit my website at sunshine-parenting.com and search for episode 26. I'd love to include you on my weekly email list if you're not already receiving them. You can join my email list by going to the homepage of my website and subscribing there. I'm going to leave you with some words from the conclusion of Be the Parent, Please that I especially enjoyed because she was talking about summer camp. A month of camp is a very expensive way to keep a child in a technology-free environment. And certainly that wasn't the only reason we chose to send her. But there are clearly plenty of other parents willing to pay for this luxury. There are so few spaces left where kids could be left alone, where we and other parents cannot hover. It is not because I am nostalgic or even because I'm a Luddite that I think a month without screens is a good idea. It's because children without technology are more independent, more confident, and more free.